Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Gloria Suarez. She is a math teacher at Ascent Classical Academy in northern Colorado. Gloria, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Excited to hear your story today, which takes us from engineer to classical school teacher, where you are now. Let's begin the story a little earlier than engineering. Tell us a little bit about your educational experience growing up.
Well, so I'm originally from Mexico, and I went to a private bilingual school, because you have to learn English in order to succeed in life. And we moved a little bit throughout in Mexico, and it was a great opportunity for me to kind of get the travel bug, if you want to say. So at the very early age, I was not afraid of moving to new places and experiencing new places. And that has actually helped me a lot throughout my adult life. So just the typical private school kid. We moved to El Paso, Texas when I was about 13, 14. Before that, I actually did go to a boarding school in Maryland for a year. And I was in a public school for my high school. And then I graduated and I stayed home and I went to University of Texas at El Paso, where I started learning engineering. Why engineering? Somebody somewhere told me that I was decent at math and I'm not really good with my hands. So I went into engineering and I loved it.
Did you enjoy your school experience growing up? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. I had the typical friends and activities and I swam and all that stuff. So to me, it was the way to learn, at school.
So you go to Texas, El Paso, engineering degree. What do you do with it?
So it's a mechanical engineering degree, and I wanted to work for the automotive industry. So where did you go? You go to Detroit. So I was very fortunate to find a job at Delphi Automotive, which is it used to be part of GM.
Right.
And I was there for a year, and I got the opportunity to start working at Chrysler. And when I went to interview at the tech center, I just fell in love with it. And so I stayed. I worked for Chrysler for about, I believe it was there 6 or 7 years. And at that time, my husband got an opportunity to work for Shell in Houston. So we moved. And I told him, well, I'm not working anymore. I retired from my engineering career after really only 9 years or so.
And then your kids enter the picture.
Yes.
And there's a decision to be made about how they are schooled. What did you decide?
So it's kind of funny because if you had met me when I was in college, you would have never, ever, ever thought, first of all, that I wanted kids. Second of all, that I would even stay home. I was the last person in the world that would ever do that. But funny how God works, because when we were living here in Michigan, we just started meeting a lot of homeschool families. And I saw, they're kind of different. And I just liked what I saw. So when we moved to Houston, we decided that I was going to stay home. Not necessarily homeschool, but just stay home. And my daughter was ready to go to preschool, and I just felt super uneasy with that decision. And my husband said, okay, it's preschool. Like, we won't screw her up, right? I mean, she's tiny. It's fine. Why don't you just start homeschooling? I mean, if you can call homeschooling preschool.
Sure.
So I did that, and then we always just took it 1 year at a time, and 17 years later.
Was that intimidating for you because you didn't have an educational background necessarily, an engineering background? So even making that first choice to say, we're going to homeschool our kids, was that a little intimidating for you?
It was, but God has really blessed us with people that we have met throughout our lives. And I met a wonderful group of homeschool moms. And they were just so encouraging. And I thought, well, if they can do this, I can do this. So again, when they're preschool, kindergarten, you're homeschooling for like half an hour, right? A day, 1 hour at the most. And the rest of the time you're just playing, or because we lived in Houston, you go to the pool and you just do all these extra activities. And I really, really just loved spending time with my kids. Of course, there were those days.
There always are.
There always are. But overall, I just loved spending the time. Yeah.
When you get deeper and they're not preschool, kindergarten age anymore, you make another decision that it's going to be a classical education at home.
Correct.
Again, where were you introduced to that concept, and why did you think that was the best decision for your children?
So before then, I was kind of using my father's world, and we just focused a lot on reading books. So like if I was going to teach a little bit about math, we would read a book, and then, we would count the animals or whatever, right? And one day a friend told me about classical conversations. I had absolutely no idea what that meant, but I trusted my friend, and I'm like, sure, I'll do it with you, without knowing anything about it. And I was just super impressed how the kids at that young age were able to learn timeline. And, my daughter at 6 years old she could tell you all the capitals and point to all the countries in South America. And I was just super impressed because, to be honest, I couldn't do that. So then I just really liked it. And then again, just year after year, we just kept doing that. When they were a little bit older, then we also introduced Veritas Press as well. And I think because we read so much literature, a lot of books, my kids absolutely loved history. And, then it's classical education is so rich, as you know. And so the books that we were reading, and they got way more out of it than probably me. And I wish I would have learned that way. And to be honest, it's kind of like I was learning alongside because I never read any of those books, and I just didn't have that education. So yes, I had a master's degree in engineering, but my education was very low, even though I had a degree.
Yeah. How do you, if you recall, how would you describe that sort of education to other parents in your homeschool circle? Why was it effective for your children, this classical way of approaching education?
I think because classical education really works around the development of the brain of the child. So at the very beginning, they're like sponges. You know, they want to learn all these. They don't understand any of it. So at least classical conversations takes that brain development stages. And so for example, at the very beginning, it's a lot of just memorizing facts. Again, they don't understand what they're doing. But then it progresses where, you know, they're asking a lot of whys. Why do I have to do this? Why this? Why that? And so that's when you start introducing more the rhetoric, right? There, you have conversations and then you get their viewpoint and you throw a wrench, you know, in their viewpoint. And so it's I think classically it just works with the development of the brain naturally.
Talking with Gloria Suarez about her journey from engineer to classical school teacher. As your children also get older, you were telling me you moved to Europe.
Correct.
You told me you were not afraid to move to new places.
I am not.
So that means you had some pretty interesting and unique experiences with your children as you were learning. You were able to visit a lot of these places.
Correct. So my husband at that point was working for the oil industry, and he was working in Africa. And just one day I tell my husband, what if we went to Europe? And he's like, oh my gosh, you are crazy. What do you mean? I'm like, well, let's just see. If the house sells in, you know, a couple of months, it's meant to be. If it doesn't, then, you know, we'll stay. So again, God has blessed us a lot. So it sold and we decided to go to Portugal. And my husband used to work for a month and then rest for a month. So the month that he was home, we would go and, you know, to go to Rome and or Italy and Greece and Israel and all sorts of, you know, places. So we would either read or talk about the history, and then we would go see it in person. And again, I was just amazed how kids are. I mean, my son, he would, you know, we're in the 16th chapel and he's like telling me all about the painting and this and that. And the capacity of kids is just really amazing. So we were super blessed to have that experience of reading and then seeing it in person.
So then you re-entered the workforce, not as an engineer, but as a teacher. How did that decision come about, and where did you end up?
So we go back to Texas, and my husband had an opportunity to go to Virginia. And at the same time, my son, who was now a sophomore, he wanted to go to a military academy the last 2 years because he really, really, really wanted to get into West Point. So it just happens again, God's sovereignty, that we go to Virginia, tiny town, 1,000 people. And there just happens to be a military academy there, a boarding school. So as we're driving, we see that, we stop, we ask questions. And the one requirement that I had was that they had to have AP calculus and AP physics. And at that time, they did not have a teacher. I think the highest class that they had was pre-cal. But he had to have that in order to get into West Point. So, 4 or 5 weeks before school started, the dean of academics calls me and he's like, hey, you're an engineer. Would you like to teach calculus? And I did it really for my son because he needed that. And I loved it. I really just enjoyed my time greatly.
What did you experience moving from a classroom of your own children to a classroom of your children and perhaps other people's children?
The advantage, I think, was that because it was a boarding school, the kids were always there. So I kind of became, in some ways, kind of like their mom as well. So I had great relationship with pretty much all of them. And I really enjoyed working with the older kids because, you know, they're mature enough to have conversations and they were friends of my son as well. So I would invite them to my house. And I don't know, I just really, really, really enjoyed it.
And you were there for a couple of years.
Only 2 years.
2
correct.
years. And now we move again to a new state,
And
this time Colorado.
correct.
So why Colorado?
Again, my husband, he's very fortunate to be married to me because not everybody does that. So anyway, so we moved last July to Colorado, and you know, he goes to work. Now we're empty nesters, right? Because my daughter is in college and my son is now at West Point. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? So I thought about going back to engineering, but I had been out from the field for so many years that I just found it really hard. Not hard, but I was just not having success. And talking to my husband, I said, you know, I think I really, really enjoyed teaching. He's like, well, I mean, do that. And I interviewed and I actually had 3 other offers, and I was waiting on this offer because I really wanted to work at this school. And when they called me, I was really excited. Yeah, so here I am.
So math teacher at Ascent Classical Academy in Northern Colorado. Why were you so interested? Why were you waiting, making these other offers wait until you heard back from Ascent Classical Academy? What was so special about it?
So because we have moved a lot, I'm a strong believer of when you go into a place and you feel comfortable. I mean, we bought and sold a lot of houses, and that's really how I know what house to buy. When you go in and you're like, oh yes, you know, I belong here. And that's what I felt when I went for the interview and they toured me around, and I just thought, yeah, I belong here. It was just a gut feeling. And so, yeah, when they called me, I was like, thanks, but no thanks to the other ones.
As we talk, you're still preparing to begin the first year at Ascent Classical Academy. So as you look at the curriculum, as you begin to plan for what you'll do with your students, what excites you and what perhaps gives you a little bit of trepidation?
Well, I'm familiar with the classical education, so I understand, you know, the literature and all that. I just don't know teaching my kids classically to actually applying the classical approach in a classroom. So that's kind of where I'm, okay, hopefully I can ask a lot of questions. So I know I'm going to do good. I'm just, it's just the unknown.
Sure.
The unknown. But it has not been the first time that I've stepped out of my comfort zone. So it's just another challenge.
And I assume that there is some assistance at something like this. We talk as you're at the K-12 conference here on Hillsdale's campus. What sort of things perhaps have you been hearing and learning about the last couple of days?
Well, how important it is to emphasize the culture, for example, of the school, and how everything has to be uniform. The consistency across maybe all classes. And as an engineer, you're kind of wired, step 1, 2, 3. It's comfortable for me just knowing that everything is kind of going to be the same. Of course, there's differences, but overall, we'll have one goal, we'll have one purpose. And so that gives me comfort.
Gloria Suarez, math teacher at Ascent Classical Academy in Northern Colorado. as we talk about her journey from engineer to classical school teacher. Gloria, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.